Yo guys, what's up? Ben Abbott here and welcome to this episode of Road Back to High Stakes. So let's take a quick look at the graph for the week and then get into a few more hands. As I'm sure you can tell, things didn't go so well this week, but we lost about 20k on the week in dollars and ran about 2k above EV, which we will definitely take. In terms of big blinds, we lost about 8 buy-ins and ran about 3-ish buy-ins above EV on the week. So there were a few people asking me in the comments about the difference between the orange and the green line, so I thought I'd quickly explain. The green line is effectively exactly the number of dollars I have won or lost in a week, and the orange line is an all-in EV line. Now, an all-in EV line effectively tells us how much we should or shouldn't have won when we are all in with cards to come. So either pre-flop, on the flop, or on the turn. So in the example of a hand like Ace-King versus Pocket 8, where let's say it's around 50-50 chance of winning, the all-in EV line should stay at around evens because our expectation is to win half of the pot. However, in the majority of cases when we run it once, we are either going to win or lose that hand. Therefore, we are either going to be 100 big blinds below EV or we are going to be 100 big blinds above EV. Now, it's really important to remember that the orange line only gives us a very small window into what is happening in the overall picture, and there are other stats and other lines that we can look at to give us a much better idea of how things are going. And the two other factors I want to talk about today are red and blue line. So as we can see in the graph for the week, all of my lines are going down, and let me tell you now, that is never ever going to be conducive to a good week. So if you have a losing red line and a losing blue line, I'm sorry to tell you, you are not going to have a winning green line. That said, let's just have a little think about what these lines mean. So red line effectively comes from times that you have won the pot with no showdown. So when we have bet and our opponent has folded. Now, other way that you get red line is through calling. So imagine when someone triple barrels you and you fold the river, naturally your red line is going to go down because you have lost the pot at non-showdown. However, if you call, your red line remains flat. Now, onto the blue line. This is how much you win when you show your cards at showdown. So as you can see in my graph, when I've shown my hand on the river, it is pretty clear to see that I've had the worst hand the majority of the time. That's not to say I haven't played badly over this sample. Potentially, I've made many bad hero calls, and that has also impacted my blue line. But you can kind of assume that if you're not a massive red line winner, that if you do have a losing blue line, you're going to do very badly on the weeks that your blue line tanks. So I hope that gives you a little bit more of an insight as to what's going on in the graph section. But let's now get to some hands. So this week, we're not going to list off what we're going to be looking at in the hands. We're just going to go with quite a few more than we have done in previous weeks, and I hope you enjoy. Here we have Queen Jack suited in the big blind. We get a limp from a large recreational player under the gun, and a very quick ISO to 3.5x from a pretty tight and honest reg. We then get a pretty quick call from the button, who is a slightly more aggressive reg, and I go ahead and call in the big blind. I guess there's a small argument to 3-betting here, but I think calling is quite a lot better. We flop top pair on Queen 3-3 and start out with a check, and the ISO pretty quickly bets 1/3 pot. I think they can be doing this with a load of hands. I decide to just call and never raise my hand, and the recreational folds. We see a 4 of spades on the turn giving us a flush draw, and we go ahead and check 2 in position. So we see the 7 of spades on the river giving us a flush. So we need to think about our sizing here. I think we're definitely going to need a small sizing, and that's going to be around our Queen X and maybe the occasional quad 3s or something like that. And then we're going to have a big sizing as well. Whether or not that big sizing is 2/3 pot, because maybe our range can't quite support a bigger sizing than that, is up for debate. My belief here is that our flushes are definitely worth an overbet. And I do think Queen Jack spades here is going to make a lot more money by going overbet than it is going to be, let's say, block calling. And we get a bit of a tank from villain and they shove. So I think it's fair to say, and I would hope that people would agree, that we're pretty much top of range here. We are going to have the occasional pocket 3s, absolutely. That is going to be in our range. However, we may choose to check shove that on the river or block, so it's going to be discounted somewhat. And obviously there's only one combo anyway, and I might not even call it pre-flop. So massively discounted combo for sure. Then I think the rest of our range is pretty much just going to be Queen X of spades. And by that I mean Queen 10, Queen Jack, which I haven't 3-bet pre, which I'm probably never going to do. And then really discounted King Queen, and even more discounted Ace Queen of spades, because I think I would definitely 3-bet that pre-flop. So I think it's fair to say that we're close to the top of our range here. That said, what do people think about this exact node and the way it's gone down? We can't check Pio here, which is a great thing for discussion. We've gone 4-way to the flop after a limp and an ISO and 2 overcalls. We've check called versus 1/3 on the flop, and then we overbet the river when our range is very well defined. For me personally, the fact that that action has happened, coupled with me not really believing that this player gets that out of line, and I've never really seen them get out of line, and then the added factor of, do I really expect in position to try and make me fold ace queen or king queen of spades here, or queen high flush? I think all of that combined leads me to believe that it's a pretty unlikely set of circumstances. So with all of that considered, I do decide to make what is potentially a standard, but in my eyes, a relatively tight fold. So here we are on ignition, and we get an open from the button, who is a recreational, and I go ahead and 3-bet ace queen suited. After a little bit of a tank, we get cold 4-bet out of the big blind, and I go ahead and defend. We see 10-8-5 with 2 hearts and a diamond, giving us a backdoor flush draw, and we can go ahead and check. In position then bets 25% pot. I think versus like even 1/3 pot, definitely we're indifferent. Versus 25% pot, I think it's kind of close. But as I've said before, I think the ignition pool is a little bit on the splashy side. So I'm definitely going to be calling my combo always. Jack of hearts on the turn, giving us a double gutter, but also completing the flush. I go ahead and check, and then in position also goes ahead and checks. Now the river is a 3 of hearts, completing the 4 flush. Now I think the hands that we're going to be wanting to bluff here are going to be hands like pocket 6s and pocket 7s if we didn't raise the flop, which I think we will do a decent amount of the time. Then there's going to be some 7-6, which is definitely going to arrive quite a lot of the time. In terms of our value region here, we're probably going to be wanting to shove at least some of the time with most of our flushes. Pocket 9s, for example, even a hand like 8-7 of hearts, I think can probably go for it on the river as well, given that in position shouldn't really have that many hearts, if I'm honest with you. They should be betting the turn pretty often with their flushes and also with their semi-bluffs. So they're somewhat discounted. And then we're going to need to have some other bluffs if we're going to be shoving all of those flushes ourselves. So I believe hands like ace queen are actually going to make a very, very good bluff here. Having diamonds, honestly, is not ideal at all, given the imposition is probably going to be c-betting and then checking back turn. However, I do believe this hand is going to get bluffed at least some of the time, and I do go ahead and jam. And on this occasion, we do get snap called by a 7 of hearts. Here we have King Jack offsuit in the big blind, and we are versus a splashy opponent. This player was blasting in the majority of spots. So we flop top pair on King 9-3 with the flush draw, and we start out with a check. Villain goes ahead and sizes up 2/3 pot, which seems pretty good on this texture, but also this was their standard sizing, 2/3 pot. Go ahead and call. I don't really see much merit in check raising the flop versus the big sizing. I'd rather keep the range as wide as possible. We turn the 2 pair on the Jack of diamonds, bringing a second flush draw, and we go ahead and check. Villain now goes with full pot, which is a pretty decent sizing for this texture, I would say. I think there's a good symmetry in the Queen 10, therefore not really allowing in position to overbet all that much. That said, this player was extremely splashy, so I do believe that this is going to be massively overbluffed. We river a 9 of clubs, which shouldn't really change a whole lot, I wouldn't say. Either way, they go ahead and shove for 2.5 times pot. Now, I think ordinarily here we have a pretty clear fold. If we're going to call a King Jack, I think we really need to make sure that our suits match the board. We need to be blocking King 9 and Jack 9 suited here to consider calling, I believe. That said, we also do block King's full and Jack's full, so that is working in our favour. My concern here is that in position is definitely going to have Queen 10 a bunch of the time, and we are very much not going to have those combos. I think we do raise the turn at least a decent amount of the time. The thing that kind of swayed me in this situation was I do believe that in position is not really considering about all of these factors all that much, and the fact that they are very blast happy in a spot where I don't really have that many 9s. I have some 9x of diamonds, don't really have any straights, and I don't really have any boats. I do think that calling a lot of the time with a lot of our bluff catches is going to perform really well. And this happens to be one of those times because I do make the call. And on this occasion, we do find the spicy Queen Deuce of Spades. So here we are with Ace Jack offsuit with 125 big blinds with the button, and they go ahead and cold call pretty quickly. Now, I wasn't sure if this player was a recreational or a reg. We see A7-4 rainbow, and we start out with a check. In position doesn't waste too much time and goes ahead with just over pot. See, I'm inclined to believe now that this is probably a reg when I see this sizing in position on this board. I think recreationals here might go half, might go 2/3 pot. I think it's quite unusual for recreational to custom size just over pot here. So I'm going to hold that loosely in mind when I proceed with the rest of the hand. Either way, I can't really check raise my combo, definitely can't fold, and I will just be calling. Pretty dream card on the ace of diamonds, and I definitely believe that we're going to be playing some leads here. I think when we check call out of position, we have way more ace X than in position bets, given how polar they are on the flop. So I do think leading is definitely an option. This time I go ahead and check. The reason I go ahead and check is that just because I think this might be a reg, it also might be a blasting recreational as well. I want to give as much rope to a player like that as possible. They get out now the 150% pot. Now I'm definitely convinced that this is a reg. There's absolutely no way recreational is taking this line. I think the main thing I would say is the likelihood of recreational taking this line as a bluff is extremely unlikely. I'm already actually hating it on the turn. That said, I don't really think I can fold trips with improval to the nuts on plenty of rivers, so I do call. We see a pretty terrible 3 of diamonds. 6-5 now fills up, although I would say that 6-5 is never going to jam as in position. I guess if it was potentially recreational, which again I don't think it is, they might jam 6-5. But at least 6-5 does fill up, and then obviously the backdoor diamonds, loads of cold call diamonds definitely could take this line, particularly as a reg. I think I have a pretty standard mix on the river in theory, but in reality I think this line is wildly underbluffed. So with that in mind, I do go ahead and fold pretty quickly. And this time, given on ignition you can find people's cards, we do find the pocket fours for the results oriented good fold. Here we have ace 10 of spades in MP, and we go ahead and open. We then get 3-bet by what seemed to be a reg in the small blind, and we go ahead and mix 4-bet and call, and this time we go ahead and call. Billy goes ahead and bets around 27% pot, and I think we just have a pretty close call. My sizing scheme here is going to be at least half pot. I prefer 2/3 pot after the small bet has gone in on the flop and villain has checked to us. I do decide to bluff my hand very often on the turn. I could be convinced that I'm overdoing it here, but I do think this performs very well in reality as well. So I do go ahead and bet 2/3 pot. Villain calls, and we see a very good 8 of spades on the river. The reason I say this river is good is because so many of our bluffs fill up. Our 6-5 and our Jack 10 that floats the flop definitely are going to arrive in this node. I mean, some of those hands are going to check as the turn, but for all intents and purposes, we are going to river the nuts fairly often. We also still have very clear shoves with ace king plus on the river, so we have an abundance of value. I think in reality here, we're probably not meant to be bluffing a hand all the time, but in game, I do decide to bluff my hand every single time. And after not too long at all, we do get the fold from pocket queens. Here we have ace king offsuit in the big blind, and we get an open from a new and very capable opponent from under the gun, and we go ahead and 3-bet this time. So we see queen 10-3 rainbow, and this is going to be a board that we're going to be betting often and for small sizing, so I go ahead and do that. Once villain does call, obviously now their range is more filtered than our range. Our range is actually very unfiltered. We're going to be 3-betting hands like 8-7 suited, 5-4 suited, pre-flop, and then c-betting them very often. Whereas in position, while they may have those pre-flop, are never really going to be calling those hands. Therefore, we are going to be playing a number of checks on the turn. However, at the top end of our range, we do have a pretty large advantage. And I do believe blocking ace-queen, blocking king-queen, blocking kings is probably going to mean that we are going to be betting our hand very often. As for sizing, half pot or 2/3 pot are both going to be okay here. So I go ahead and bet, I think, 2/3 pot, I believe. Villain does tank for a little while now. They did snap call the flop, or very quickly call the flop, and now they're tanking, which is definitely notable. But either way, they do end up calling. We see the 3 of clubs on the river, and now we need to consider what we want to do with our combo. So on the one hand, blocking king-jack here is a bit of a disaster, but that is only one combo of king-jack suited. The other thing to consider is that my bluffing combos here are definitely going to be combos like 5-4, 8-7 suited that have now turned a gut shot, as well as 9-8 suited. So those hands are pretty much going to be turbo bluffed on the river. I'm blocking, as I said, king-jack suited and hands that are going to fold. I'm never going to be bluffing a hand with a jack in it because I'm going to be checking my ace-jack on the turn, as I believe in position is going to be pure folding pocket jacks on the turn. So the other combo that I block is king 10 suited, but that is also going to be indifferent for in position on the river. So all that considered, I need to decide how much of my ace king I'm allowed or I want to bluff. And what it boiled down to here for me was I block ace-3 suited, which whilst is somewhat discounted, in position is going to arrive at least some of the time with that combo. I also block king-queen and I block ace-queen, which are definitely combos that are going to arrive pure, particularly the suited varieties of those combos. So all things considered, I think our combo makes a pretty good bluff in terms of all the ace-king combos that we have to choose from, and I randomize by just going with this combo always. And sadly, this time we do run into the very well played ace-queen of diamonds. That's going to do it for the video and the hands today. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have any feedback on the format today, the video is a bit longer, as I'm sure you've noticed. There are more hands, maybe a little bit less analysis here and there. If you have any feedback, please do let me know in the comments below. But until next time, take care and good luck at the tables.